And for those of you who were here yesterday, I see many familiar faces. Do you hear me all right? Yeah. Ambassador Issacharoff, we're surrounded here by friends and good supporters of Israel. But it's my job as a journalist and editor to ask you some tough questions. And then, if you agree,
It's my job as a diplomat to evade them as much as
If you agree, we'll open it up to questions from the audience as well. So you started with Iran. Let me start with Iran as well. I mean, there clearly was a difference of opinion between the Obama regime and the Netanyahu one. It also became very personal, and the Prime Minister, who is also the Foreign Minister, traveled to Washington to address Congress. Do you see the day after, as you say, the Iran deal, what do you see as Israel's main role now?
Well, first of all, we have to make a range of different assessments regarding the agreement itself. And obviously, we'll have to look at how the agreement that has recently been formally adopted on the 18th of October, the next phase of the agreement will be that after Iran has conducted several steps that it's mandated to take under the agreement, there will be at some point in the future, could be early 2016, spring of 2016, maybe even in the summer, the implementation day, which essentially, once Iran has been certified as doing everything it's been mandated to do by the agreement, at that point, a substantial amount of sanctions will be removed on Iran, which means that a lot of leverage potentially will be lost on Iran. However, there is a mechanism that can provide for a snapback of sanctions that is envisaged by the agreement. It'll be it'll be an even more challenging time for us to keep our eyes open, to share what we see with our allies, America, our European friends, and to ensure to the greatest extent possible that if this agreement is indeed part of our reality, that it is fully and completely implemented and no steps are taken prematurely.
The first Jerusalem Leaders Summit has been convened at a very tough time for Israel. We're experiencing a wave of terrorism against Israelis. How do you see this playing it out, and what is the government's policy in terms of, do you think it's going to get worse or better?
Well, obviously, the policy will be only guided to making the situation less tense and preventing further escalation. And that essentially was behind the recent understanding that was reached with John Kerry, Secretary of State John Kerry, regarding the Temple Mount issue, which had been the subject of a great deal of incitement, and incitement which inflamed touched a lot of sensitivities with absolutely no basis in fact. And that's why we reaffirmed previous understandings with the Jordanian government regarding the status quo and guaranteeing what we see as a cornerstone of our foreign policy regarding Jerusalem as freedom of access for all faiths in Jerusalem, and also of recognizing the special role of Jordan in that regard. But beyond that, also agreeing on the installation of cameras that can monitor the Temple Mount. Now, this isn't the end. This is part of a phase. I think it's fair to say that the events, by and large, have receded, one hopes, from Jerusalem. They've moved into kind of a different area. And again, we will do everything we can to take every step that will reduce the tensions and prevent further escalation.
Is there any chance
of... But I will say one thing, that we will do everything also we need to do to protect our citizens.
I was going to say, is there any hope for some kind of resumption of the peace process? Do you see any chance of that happening in the near future?
It's not something that one can easily be optimistic about. The Prime Minister has said a number of times in a number of forums he's willing to meet Abbas anywhere, at any time, without preconditions. And we're talking about a meeting. We're not even yet talking necessarily about actual negotiations. Unfortunately, it seems to me clear that the Palestinians the leadership of the Palestinians at this point have tended to adopt an approach of going to the international community, to multilateral fora, to various international legal entities like the ICC in The Hague, as a much more preferred option than actually sitting face-to-face with Israel and negotiating with us and trying to work together to solve this conflict. And at the end of the day, Israel has a peace treaty with Egypt, with Jordan, and that was essentially achieved by face-to-face negotiations between us and the other side. And that could, in essence, there can be no substitute for that direct contact. And it's not something that can be done in international conferences. It won't be done in international conferences like in the UN. It has to be done quietly, with respect, but in a direct, very direct way between us and the Palestinians.
We have many friends here also from Europe, some distinguished guests. And I wanted to ask you, we led the Jerusalem Post today with a story about how the European Union plans to label goods either made in Israel or if they're made over the Green Line. And in this case, they're referring not only to settlements, but also to East Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, all the territories captured in the Six-Day War. There will be a basis then for labeling and boycotting those products. How is the Deputy Foreign Minister, Tzipi Hotovely, going to combat that when she goes to Europe? And I believe she left today. Did she leave today?
Yes.
How does she plan, and how does the Foreign Ministry plan to combat this really battle against Israel?
Look, first of all, the Foreign Ministry and the whole of the Israeli Diplomatic Foreign Service will be clearly engaged in this. This is an issue that we have great concern. This is a very exceptional step taken by the European Union. We don't know of any other instance of any other conflict, and there are plenty of conflicts in the world as a whole, where the European Union has decided to label certain goods, which essentially is seen as a step taken against Israel or any Israelis within Judea and Samaria. And so this is clearly not going to help our relationship with the Europeans. I don't think it's going to help encourage the part, or at least Israel, to see their role in any potential attempts to get the negotiations back together, to see their role in a kind of mediating, honest brokering way, because this is clearly a step taken against Israel. I'd also say that there are a significant number of Israeli factories operating in the areas, and they actually employ a few, I'd say maybe well in excess of 30,000 Palestinians, and it's quite possible that these businesses, given this new constraint, will prefer to move their facilities to within Israel. So in many ways, that could also dramatically affect the livelihood of Palestinians. And we've been making many different attempts to actually improve the economic conditions in the territories to the greatest extent possible, not only in the West Bank, but even in Gaza.
You know, many friends of Israel ask me, and so I'm passing on the question to you, what is the best way to combat campaigns such as BDS, the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Movement, against Israel? Do you think we should address those frontally? Should we ignore them? What do you believe in the Foreign Ministry is the best way to fight such boycott campaigns?
Well, I think there's clearly, it's not something you can ignore. This is a phenomena which is growing, and there have been a number of different attempts to embarrass Israel, to isolate Israel. You remember recently this whole business with Orange International and a whole host of other examples one could give. And I think it's fair to say that when we've reacted, and we've reacted firmly, we have actually been, to a certain extent, I'd say, successful. Look, this is a problem that has many different roots and many different sources. It's something that needs a different kind of overall strategy to combat it. Only recently, there's been a lot of attention paid to this in the government in terms of setting up the necessary tools that we need to work this issue. This is not a kind of routine issue that foreign policy people work or even governments do. And that we're trying to be innovative, creative, and use newer tools that can address this type of problem. But obviously, I think it's a lot of you in the audience have a tremendous influence on this, and it's also something that can be constrained and even fought against by your active involvement as well.
Well, I think that would be a good time to open it up to the audience. Does anyone have a question for Ambassador Issacharoff? Woman in front.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't do that either.
The pronouncements from Israel's neighbors the threats are based on ideology. And we hear, those of us who live in Israel, hear the same kind of pronouncements from those who are stabbing. What chance is there of a political agreement, a peace process, when it seems to be an ideological war?
Look, one of the things I think we have to remember, a couple of things. At this present time, Israel is not facing these regional problems alone. A lot of our neighbors are facing the same problems in different ways. Not only Israel is concerned about Iran in the area, a lot of countries in the Gulf, we've heard statements made by Saudi Arabia, other Gulf countries, are no less concerned. And in many ways, I'd say recent times, our relations with both with Jordan and with Egypt have been also cooperative in trying to deal with the present threats, which are of concern not only to them, but also to us. And I think it's important to note that with all of these different threats, there is a greater potential between Israel and other moderate Arab countries to work together. At the end of the day, we don't only share similar viewpoints regarding what's going on in Iran, but also regarding Syria, regarding Hezbollah, the role of Hezbollah in Lebanon, Gaza, about Hamas. You'll see there are a number of points of conversion which didn't really exist in previous years. So I think it's important to try and build on that regional potential. I think that regional potential can also be an important stimulus to a renewed Israeli-Palestinian discussion. And I think from that point of view, I would hope that this situation, with all its complexities and all of its dangers, maybe can present some opportunity.
Another question? The gentleman in the front. Please, if you can ask a short question and not give a speech.
Hi, I'm Raphael Har, founder of UnitedJerusalem.com. My question is you claim that there is an agreement with Iran, but in order to have an agreement, you'd have to have both parties accept the terms and conditions. Today, I don't know if you've read the Yigal Carmon from Middle East Media Research Institute's op-ed that Khamenei has put in conditions here. How is it that we can term this as how can we see this as an agreement when then both parties don't agree?
Thank you.
First of all, I think no one will mistake that I'm describing a reality of there being maybe not an agreement, but a joint plan of action. This isn't an agreement in the traditional sense of international diplomacy. It's not a treaty. It's a plan of action. If you've felt from what I said that I have many illusions regarding Iran's intentions to observe the terms of the plan of action, I am still reserving a lot of judgment on that. First and foremost, as I said, they have tested missiles which are in contravention to Security Council Resolutions 1929. They have continued to supply arms to Hezbollah in Syria, which is also in contravention to the number of Security Council resolutions, not just one. And I think one of the major challenges that we're going to have in this whole phase will be to gauge just what the compliance of Iran is with what they've undertaken. And I have no doubts that I know what Khamenei has written to Rouhani and what Rafsanjani has said. You know, I do not underestimate the capability of Iran to wiggle out of very tight corners.
I believe we have a question from over here, even though we can't see you.
Yeah, you can't see me, but all right, hi. I wanted to see if you would comment on Russia and what they're doing with Iran right now in combat operations in Syria. Mm-hmm. What is Russia's long-term or even short-term play, and how much does that concern Israel? And obviously, the Prime Minister I think may have been the first foreign leader to head to Moscow to discuss the situation. What light can you shed on it, on the effect of Russia and Iran operating combat together north of Israel's borders?
Thank you. Good question.
Look, it's a good question and could need, I hope, a good answer. As you said correctly, the Prime Minister, we saw at a very early period of time when we realized that the Russians were beginning to reinforce their presence in Syria. We realized immediately that we need to talk to the Russians in order to prevent the possibility of misunderstandings, of clashes that neither they want or we want. It was in no way intended to signify any approval by Israel of what the Russians were doing. But this is a very unstable area. The airspace in Syria is very crowded. There are a lot of actors there. And the air activity touches many borders, not just the Turkish border. And from that point of view, it was absolutely clear that we need to have a technical military channel to prevent any misunderstandings that, as I said before, we wanted to avoid. Now, we've made very clear to the Russians, not only now, but in previous years, our concerns regarding, first and foremost, the border area on the Golan Heights, and our intention to maintain our security to the greatest extent possible, given that you now have a presence of Hezbollah, Quds Force, the Al-Nusra Front, and other elements, and potentially ISIS elements as well. And we have every intention of maintaining our security in that region, in that part of Syria. We also have made it very clear that when we see transfers of weaponry, sophisticated Russian weaponry that has been passed on to the Syrians and then passed on to Hezbollah, we've said very clearly that we are concerned by that and we won't accept that as a part of the reality. So our discussion with the Russians is very frank, it's very candid. but I think our position has been very well understood by them. And I would hope that they would take into account in a very serious way our concerns. But the situation in Syria has become extremely complex. And not only Israel is talking to the Russians, the Americans have spoken to the Russians, the Jordanians have a deconflicting agreement with them as well. So this is not something that you like to do, but you actually have to do.
Ambassador Nikita, did you have a question? I saw you. No, okay. There was a gentleman in the back.
Yes, Mr. Perkins outlined very nicely the variation of opinion between the current U.S. administration and most current U.S. Evangelical Christians. We are now 1 year away, as you know, from a new White House, a new executive branch administration. I'd like to know what you would like to see from a new candidate related to the U.S.-Israeli relations.
I'd like to see what I'd like to see at any given time, that the relationship between Israel and the United States remains robust, ironclad, and extremely close as it has been over the years. I served in Washington during the 90s. I served in Washington again after that as DCM in the embassy. I'm very much aware of all the different facets of the relationship, and in many ways, a lot of the relationship functions, the real nuts and bolts of the relationship functions distinctly from electoral events one way or another. So what I want to see at that point is exactly what I want to see now, a very strong and unshakable bond between the two countries.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more question? All right. In that case, I'll ask it myself. Oh. It's wonderful to hear such an articulate advocate for Israel. But let me ask you this. We do have an image problem. We have many millions of friends, as Tony Perkins pointed out. But we also have many enemies around the world, using social media, doing all kinds of things that we're not very good at combating. And I think, would you agree that we're losing the battle for public opinion around the world?
Look, first of all, I think you have to take into account that the dimensions that you talk about, the issue of the social media, the impact of the internet, all the virtual cyberspace is having incredible impacts on all facets of diplomacy, including public diplomacy. Just the other day when there was this stabbing in one of the northern suburbs of Jerusalem, a 13-year-old Palestinian kid stabbed very seriously another 13-year-old Israeli kid. And it was the Palestinian child was glorified as a Palestinian martyr that had been killed in the course of this attack. And he actually was alive. He was in Hadassah Hospital, receiving all the attention that Israel would provide anyone, even a terrorist. And even the Prime Minister came to the Foreign Ministry the next day and gave a very thorough and articulate speech and provided a lot of information about what had happened, what in general at that time. And frankly, don't take this personally, but the newspapers, they may have taken the initial assertion of Abbas on the front page, but the correction made by the Prime Minister was somewhere in page 6. And look, this is done by Israel's chief spokesman, and it's very difficult to nullify the big lie. The bigger the lie, the easier it is that it's more accepted, and then to try and unwind it is a hell of a lot more difficult.
Well, thank you very much. I see Joel's sort of signaling. Sorry, did you want to say one more?
No, I'm happy
You'll
that
find
Joel's
some.
signaling because I'm almost dried out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.